Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the kind introduction, Sarah. And to those of you who are new, I hope I don't disappoint. And to those of you who aren't new, I hope I don't disappoint. Um, I thought I've only got 10 minutes with you, so which is probably sufficient to sort of give you a top line really of what I tend to think of my tips, looking back and also looking forward. And I've broken it down into two sections. And the first is what I would refer to as continuous improvement. And then the second is a bit about my journey and stepping stones to taking the chair in different industries and constructs, some of which Sarah has already alluded to in the creative industries within education, also family owned and private owned boards. So just in terms of continuous improvement, the one thing I suppose I didn't really think about until I became a NED many years ago, actually at the age of 24, I was thrown onto my first board by my then CEO. I genuinely thought it was a monopoly board. I had no idea what a board really did. But I suppose the one thing that I thought was quite distinct from the executive world is your CPD, is your sort of continued professional development. And I don't know about you, but it feels like to me there is a vast amount of information as NEDs you need to really stay across. And therefore, almost being incurably curious and being very deliberate and intentional about your learning. And I tend to split that up between both formal routes and informal. PJ referred to, I hope I got that right, PJ refers to the FT Board Director Programme. I often speak for them, and it's definitely a world-class programme. But I think that actually I'll start with the informal and then I'll move to the more formal learning. So I think one of the best sayings that I heard many years ago was that you have two ears and one mouth, and to use it in that proportion. And that really is very true for the NED world, by which I mean you are constantly, I suppose, absorbing information around you and being very willing to do that. And you are very much in receive mode in as much as you are often required to be in transmit mode, although arguably more in receive, more about the learning. And I suppose when I think of execs, I very much see them in the weeds with their head down, and the board and the wider chair who are doing the heavy lifting are really required to keep their heads up, horizon scanning the wider environment, where the disruption might be coming from, geopolitics, asking questions often that the execs haven't thought about. I think the executive leadership is about helping people understand what to think about. I think that is equally true of the non-exec world. The thing that I also think that is informal and very difficult to measure, but is EQ, your sort of emotional intelligence, if you will, and being very sort of self-aware and developing techniques to make sure that actually you are ascertaining your own contribution, the quality of it. There are multiple ways to the same outcome. Often I would sort of ask fellow non-execs if there's a really difficult message that gets delivered, and you get a chief exec responds or another exec responds in a very combative way, let's say, even though I've done everything I possibly can to get the question right and say it in a way that is more inquisitive rather than instructive. I will ask a couple of colleagues, what did you think? How did that land? And you'll always build relationships with ones that you trust, right? The ones that the ones that sort of talk to you, a bit more motivated, really do read the board pack couple of times and what have you. So your trusted advisors, I suppose. And then more formally, I think that one thing you do have increasingly is you have far better education for NEDs. And I think that's important as it becomes more onerous. But for example, like the public sector and civil service, when I joined the board of the BFI, which is a DCMS appointment, it was the first time I was introduced to the Civil Service College, which is absolutely outstanding. So, there are routes equally within higher education. You have advanced HE, you have very similar environments for the NHS trusts, for the charity sector, you the NCVO. For listed companies, you have far more structured training and brilliant direct briefings. But actually across all of that, director briefings from the likes of Deloitte, KPMG, EY, all of them really, PwC, Mazars, Grant Thornton. Some of their non-exec stuff is really, really good. And every now and again, you get invited to a really nice event where, I don't know, you might get a private viewing of the Natural History Museum if you're lucky or something. But I think they're really good because also you meet other NEDs. And again, you're building your personal boardroom of advisors. And this is really important for me because I just don't believe you can build that network at the point at which you need it. And actually, that's why these types of groups like Dynamic Boards, and I remember when Sarah first spoke to me, I was really enthusiastic and I just loved her energies because actually you need a safe space to be able to bounce stuff off. It may be that you're being managed by the COSEC, for example, or you just can't get movement on something. So actually, it's really important, I think, to not only seek your own formal education, but informally ask how the board is appraised, how you might self-appraise, what questions you might ask about your own effectiveness, rather than evaluation. And I say that because evaluation feels like you're being audited. Effectiveness just feels like it's true for all of us. And also, I think in your appraisal, if you are thinking about becoming the chair, or if you are a NED, or if you are thinking about becoming a NED, be really clear about your training needs. It's a great time to say, actually, I'd love to know more about whether the sector offers anything specifically whether the sector offers anything specifically about this particular topic, or I'm joining audit or REM. And that is your moment, because actually an organisation will obviously look to fund something like that. I suppose the last thing I'll say before I move on to my own journey is to go slowly before you go fast. In terms of the heavy lifting, and that's if you are looking to become a senior independent director, whether you're looking to become a committee chair. You simply do it for too long and it's just too hard for it to be a grind. And sometimes it really is a grind, because everything is about patterns of interaction and the human relational element, and it takes all sorts. So I would encourage you to really think and do your own due diligence. Often it is easier to get asked, to sort of step up when you're on a board. It's a bit like looking for a job when you're in a job, I think. But I suppose the last bit I'll say before I move on to my own journey is that I think sometimes we're a bit shy about owning our ambition. And I say that because I think leadership effectiveness is a big part of value creation. And by value creation, whether it is a surplus or whether it is a profit or whatever your measure, that applies to the executive and it equally applies to the non-executive. So if you think you can do a good job, bring it to bear. And rise as high as your talents allow, but still be very discerning as to where you park your talents. So then I'm just going to share a bit about my own journey, really. When Sarah asked me, I really had to just sort of, go back a few years. But as I said, my initial board role was at the age of 24, and it was a trade body of the Hollywood for the Hollywood studios for what was then VHS, before it became DVD. And I was a very young board member. And at the age of 26, I became a chair of an advisory board for the British Board of Film Classification, which is, many of you know, if you see films or if you've been to cinema, you see the age category rating. It's a very, very important body in this country for entertainment. It was utterly terrifying to take the chair. And I can say now with certainty, even though many of those people are now friends, there were doubters in the room, and rightly so. But what I think when I look back, and then the subsequent steps that I have taken, is that I was obsessive about my learning. And I think that experience, it's the best teacher, but it is also the cruelest one, sadly. And when I think, I suppose when I look forward and some of the other boards that I've sat on and been asked to step up, or where I've been appointed, it is because I think connectivity has a funny way of coming back around. And people can see whether you have the character, whether you have the business intelligence and the integrity. I think we're far better judges of character than we realise. But for example, when I joined the board of Queen Mary, and I give this as a completely different reflection to the sector in which I grew up. So this is higher education, Russell Group University, a very sizable organisation responsible for the teaching and learning mission. And I very quickly actually got appointed vice chair. And I remember the outgoing chair saying to me, Mon, you should definitely do this. This is right up your street. You'll be brilliant. And I remember saying to the incoming chair, I just showed my enthusiasm. And he said to me, Monica, I will decide whether you are my vice chair. And I'll let you know. And do you know, it really kind of, I mean, I sort of had the wind knocked out of my sails, but the truth is he was absolutely right. It is for him, it was for him to decide his vice chair. And he did ask me to become vice chair. And it was the most sensational experience because he was in many ways a world-class chair. We didn't always agree on things, but that's exactly the way it's supposed to be. I then was asked to join Audit and Risk and chair REMCO. And on Audit and Risk, we saw cybersecurity as a major issue for higher education. But quite frankly, the entire sector wasn't across it. And there were gaping holes. And so I took it upon myself to talk to our auditors, Deloitte, to ask them to set up a breakfast or a dinner. And I said I would organise it and invite 12 different Audit and Risk Committee chairs to attend. And they actually were brilliant. In 30 seconds said, actually, we'd love to support you. And actually, we'll use our community of higher education organisations we advise. And overnight, I became this cybersecurity lead. I wasn't really. The truth is, I just learned and I worked very hard. And I think it's about putting in the hard yards, and the inputs determine the outputs. But equally, I would say I'm very confident in my ability to facilitate discussions and conduct discussions, which is part of my day job, I suppose. It is the ultimate role of a chair. It is less about you playing a starring role and more about getting people to surface their views, encouraging, what I call constructive tension, where you can disagree, but you cannot be disagreeable. And finally, I will say you need to know when to say no. So years ago, somebody said to me, if you get asked to be a non-exec, the thing to think about is, if you are the answer, what is the question? So why is somebody asking you? And I remember when the chair at Queen Mary asked me to be the vice chair, and I said, I'd really like feedback after every board meeting, to which he said, that's fine, but I want you to do the same for me. And I responded I remember exactly what I said. I said, well, that's fine, but you're in the seat of power. So if I give it, can you take it? And he said, yes. And then we shook hands. And only then did I decide to do it, because it's just too difficult. Because you don't know what somebody's motivation is. So if you're going to do it where you'll be additive. Be mindful if it's a cleanup job. Do your due diligence. And crucially, will you have fun? And can you go toe to toe with the executives? And if you can't, I'm not saying don't do it. I think just know what you're going into. And that's the self-awareness piece. But fundamentally, I think actually as much experience as you can build, accumulating a range of sort of experiences and building your network means that actually it's the most enjoyable task of being a non-exec when you're on the right board. And I often think the players change, the game doesn't. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that was useful.